enters, thank you, Liam. When Adar enters, joy is supposed to enter our lives. And this year we have 2 Adars and we need them both. Because we had a Purim Katan last week, and we'll have the real Purim coming up in a few weeks. So let's look at what we're going to talk about tonight. We talked about covenant ethics, which involves our responsibility to all of creation, everyone created in the image of God, and the nature of what it means to have that relationship even with someone who's a slave, no matter what their position, even with someone who's a murderer, the responsibility of witnesses, to be accurate and to recognize that they are responsible for the murderer's potential death, and they have to take very seriously the notion that that human being is created in the image of God. And then we looked at covenant ethics, where we talk about what we owe our particular group, in our case, the Jewish people, but it could be our family, it could be our townspeople, that there are different levels that we owe to them before we owe it to greater humanity. And this is where there's that tension, a conflict. Mm-hmm. We have to make a decision. And the opening piece, which I'm not going to read with you, is between basically 2 philosophers, modern philosophers. One of them, Peter Singer, who says we should base our giving, basically it's only need. Whoever needs it most, be the individual that we take care of. And Karen Green says, no, we owe certain people more than we owe others. Mm-hmm. And that's the tension, right? Do we say that it's need-based? So let's say we're going to give, we have tzedakah to give. So who are the most needy? Well, people that don't have food, people that don't have shelter, people that are desperately ill, people who are who have medical issues or who have mental issues. I mean, we could argue any of those could be seen as important, but what if I have to choose, because obviously almost everybody, with the exception of maybe Bezos, has limited resources. I mean, even Bezos has limited resources. Even the United States of America has limited resources, as wealthy as our nation is. So there have to be choices. So if I'm going to give, do I just give everything I have to the poorest? Or do I first look at a group that I am bound to, my family, my town, my people? And how do I weigh that? So again, Green says we look at that group first. Singer says, no, we look at need first. So it's not black and white. And what we're going to look at is some of the texts. And I'm going to start sharing them because we have a number of them to get to that are really fascinating. And they are going to be controversial in a number of ways. So we'll see how far we get. So if you want to read the Singer Green piece, that's that first piece. Now we get to the Tosefta. And here we have the resource of water. Yeah, there is a definite limited resource, right? Anybody knows what's going on in the western part of this country?
Yes.
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 Yes, it's drying up.
Right? It's the biggest drought in 120 years. And they haven't yet run out of water, but they are making choices as to what gets that water, what the priority is. And there's a lot of debate going. Well, in the Tosefta, during the days of the Mishnah, here was a case, and now it's a theoretical case, but it probably was based on real choices of one town that has a cistern that's full and another town right nearby that doesn't have water, enough water. So who would like to read this?
I'll read.
Thank you.
In the case of a cistern which belongs to the people of a town, if there is enough water for only the townspeople or others, the townspeople have precedence in drinking the water over the others. Others, or the townspeople's animals, the lives of others, have precedence over the animals. Rabbi Yosei says that the townspeople's animals have precedence before the lives of the others. The animals of the townspeople or the animals of others. The animal of the townspeople have precedence to the animals of others. Drinking water for the others or the laundry of the townspeople. The lives of others have precedence over their laundry. Rabbi Yosei says that laundry of the townspeople comes before the lives of others. The laundry of the townspeople or the laundry of others. The laundry of the townspeople comes first.
Okay, so this Tosefta sets precedence, and it sets a hierarchy for who takes precedent, right? So you have comments on this?
I do.
I-
I just wanted
I
to
do.
comment just briefly that when first I read about the laundry, and that struck me as, such a triviality within this context. And then I thought about it and I realized, no, it isn't trivial, because certainly in those days, keeping clean was essential to avoiding disease. So in fact, having water to do the laundry could be an essential life changing requirement.
That's good. It's good you came to that, because we often put our situation on everyone in the world. They didn't live in our situation, right? They lived in a very different world, and they didn't have a closet full of clothes, and they didn't have a closet full of shoes that many of us have, that we're blessed with. They may have had one or two things for the week, maybe one set of undergarments or two, and one maybe for Shabbat and special occasions. And they were working in physical labor, most of them. And they were living in a very dirty world, right? So what you came to, Amy, is exactly right. They have to deal with what happens if you don't clean your clothes under those circumstances. What about disease? What about fleas? What about ticks? What about all the stuff that we know? And they had issues because they didn't have a good system of getting rid of wastewater in the streets, or all around, splashing on their clothes, right? So thinking of their world, what else about this strikes you?
Can we put it back?
Oh, sure. I can put it back because I can screen share.
All right.
I learned to screen share. I haven't learned much else here, but I've learned to screen share.
Okay.
What else do you think? Oh, Joni has something here.
Yeah, it also says that the
Animal.
of the townspeople have precedence over the lives of others. So would that be in that same line of thinking that they use the animals for their livelihoods, they use them for food. So it would be kind of the same as the laundry, because you don't want to value animals over human life
Right.
today.
Right. Well, because today we don't even need animals, because we can create meat if we want it now out of plants or out of cells, apparently. So, for us, we have choices. They didn't have a lot of food choices in their lives. And obviously, if your animals die, that's one of the main sources of protein in food. Also, it's one of your main sources of workers, because you rely on animals to plow the fields, to carry your items that are too heavy to be carried, who do work for you. Right.
Correct.
Any other comments on this?
Mm-mm.
What about the difference between Rabbi Yossi and the majority? When it says that in the case of, that's the majority. When it says Rabbi Yossi, it means he's disagreeing with the majority, but he's a minority opinion, right? He has a view. He says in the first part that the townspeople's animals have precedent over the lives of others. It says in the last part that the laundry of the townspeople comes before the lives of others. But the rabbis have a different view, right? Because the rabbis, that's the last sentence, the laundry of the townspeople or the laundry of others, then it's the laundry of the townspeople. But Yossi is disagreeing with the rabbis. And in our tradition, the majority rules. So any other comments on this?
I'm assuming when they're saying animals, that is, as you said, the work animals, the horses, the mules or something. But there are other animals like pets, which I don't think should come before the people, other people.
That's an interesting notion. Did they have pets? Pets are a relatively modern thing. Most societies throughout history, if they had a dog, it was a working dog, right?
Okay.
If they had cats, they were feral cats. They were not pets, except, I'm sorry, what?
To keep away the mice.
Or to keep away mice and rats, in some societies, or in the Egyptians, they honored them and even worshiped them. But they didn't keep them as pets as we have them, at least until the modern era, the last few hundred years.
Okay.
Jews didn't keep dogs Eastern European Jews, dogs were considered to be a Gentile thing.
Really?
Ah,
Well,
okay.
think about your grandparents. How many of your grandparents, if you had immigrant grandparents, how many of them had pets?
None.
Mine did.
Yeah, what did they have?
It was a dog, a large dog, and it was like a police dog in a way.
Were they
Protect.
and they were immigrants?
My grandmother's from Poland.
Most
And
immigrants,
actually, I know what you're thinking, because the dog would be, in the concentration camp. That was horrible. But
Right.
actually, she was working for someone first, so he probably started with the dog, and she, I guess, kept it after a fashion. He became a pet of mine, But
right? Well, that was a rarity. Most Jews who came from the old country were afraid of dogs. And cats, they didn't see any benefit in. Why would you feed a cat? You use your money to feed your family and give tzedakah, but what does a cat do? I mean, unless it catches mice. And in that case, then you would have it. Do you remember in Fiddler on the Roof, they don't even have a dog.
Hmm.
They have a cow, they have a horse who comes up lame, they have chickens. I mean, they're all useful. They all serve the purpose of the family. Okay, let's come on to the next one. Okay, so a little shorter one. Tana Debe Eliyahu, this is also from the earlier period, around the year 1000, Middle Ages. Who would like to read this?
I'll read it. If someone has food in their home and wishes also to give charity and support others from his resources, then how should they do so? First, one supports one's parents. If there is a surplus, then support your siblings. If there is a surplus, then support your extended family. If there is a surplus, then support those in your neighborhood. If there is a surplus, then support those in your city. And if there is a surplus, then support the rest of the Jewish people.
Okay, so how do you feel about that?
Well, I think the first part makes a lot of sense to me, but the last part, just Jewish people, I don't know about that. I know this is a Jewish teaching, but I had a little problem with that.
What
Well,
would you,
maybe
I'm sorry, who? Rachel?
I was going to say, when it's there, if the surplus, those in your city, could be anyone or everyone.
Right.
Where
Not
it
just
doesn't say Jewish. That's what I think. I don't know.
Well, the way I thought about it was that again, putting ourselves in those times, that if Jews didn't care for each other, there was no safety net. It wasn't like there were government programs and they, for the most part lived in shtetls and they were isolated. And they certainly couldn't look to any of the, non-Jewish communities for any kind of support. And so, I see this as self-preservation.
What do you think it says to us today, though?
That's probably what I found very disturbing, this particular one, when it said, as soon as I saw that and it said, support the rest of the Jewish people, and we are so trying to be open and, feed the stranger and take care of all images, those who are images of God. And here it says, take care of the Jewish people. That's it.
Right. Now, what do you think about the notion of surplus? What do you think that means today, surplus?
I think of extra food.
Yeah, extras of anything. Especially for money,
Well, I guess it'd also be clothes, shoes. Rather than walking barefoot, support someone with shoes.
Right, and we have drives for all those things, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
In fact, Mitzvah Day is coming up and I saw the list and all those things and more. Baby diapers, I mean, there's, like a lot of lists for it. Now, it's interesting because the Hebrew is mizonot, which is food. Because in their world, they didn't have a lot of money. Money was a very different kind of commodity in their world. They did a lot of bargaining and finding ways to, they didn't have a lot of physical money. So they would, if you think about Tevye's world, that's kind of the closest we have, as we've all seen that. He sells milk and cheese, right? From the cow and from the chickens, he sells eggs. So he does that. What does he get in return? Well, it depends. Sometimes the butcher will give him meat, right? They don't necessarily exchange money, and that's already in the modern period. When we're talking about in the 10th century, much of what they do is trading and bargaining with each other, and so for them it's very physical, and they also don't have the ability to preserve things a long time. Grain, they know how to preserve grain, they know how to preserve oil, and they have preservatives, right? But by and large, they have pretty basic food. So the question still comes down to, you got poor people and you got your parents. Let's take that to begin with. Poor people in your city and your parents. Now, let's say you have enough food to give to your parents, but not to anyone else. Well, it says you give it to your parents. I think we might agree to that. Parents need it, you have it, you share with them. Now you've got more than enough for that. Do you give it to your relatives? Well, this one says you do, your siblings.
They need it.
What if you're closer to your aunt and uncle or your cousins than you are to your siblings? What if you have a relationship, an aunt that really was like a mother to you, or a cousin that has done wonderful mitzvot for you, and taken care and helped your family? Do they take precedent? Well, this one seems to say the circles are defined.
Yeah, I like that.
But our tradition is not happy with that, and that's why source 4, which is much later, by the way, this is the end of the 19th century, coming into the 20th century, is struggling with that notion. Who would like to read this one?
I'll read. Now, there is something fundamental about the details of the laws above that troubles me deeply. For if we explain the text that I have cited according to their simple meaning, that certain groups are prior to others, then imply, this is so small.
Hold it, let me get it bigger. Hold it.
Get it a little
You-
bigger, I would appreciate it.
Getting it bigger. There you go.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Okay, let's see. If we explain the text that I have cited according to their simple meaning, that certain groups are prior to others, they imply that one may distribute the entirety of one tzedakah money to one group within the established hierarchy and need not give at all to those who fall outside of that specific group. But it is well known that every wealthy person has many more relatives who are poor. And how much more is that true for people whose charity funds are scant? And if this is the case, poor people without wealthy relatives would die of starvation. Now, how is it possible to say this? Therefore, in my humble opinion, the explanation of charity priorities is as follows. Certainly, every person, whether of modest or significant means, is obligated to give a portion of their charity money to needy people who are not relatives. But to their poor relatives, they should give a greater amount than is given to those who are not related, and so on along the ladder of priorities.
Okay, so the Aruch HaShulchan, Epstein, is saying, I'm uncomfortable with that notion. And remember, he's dealing with money now because he's at the end of the 19th century and we're already into a monetary commodity system. They are dealing in money in the same way that we do. They have banks, they make loans, they earn money, salaries, they use money in their everyday life, as opposed to in the 10th century when it wasn't as common. Here it's very common. Here he's talking about tzedakah, giving tzedakah money. And he's saying, I'm uncomfortable with an absolute hierarchy because under those conditions, if that were true, then the poor will die of starvation unless they have a wealthy relative. And how many poor people have wealthy relatives? So if I'm really bound by that rigid sense, well, then I'm going to exhaust my funds, giving it to my parents, my siblings, my cousins, aunts and uncles. And by the time I get to the poor of the town, they get nothing. And so they're dying of starvation. He's saying, how do you say this? You can't, it's wrong. So he's arguing, you apportion your money, which is similar to what many of us do now. We apportion our money and decide where we're going to give it according to our priorities, right? Isn't that how, by and large, you give tzedakah?
Yes.
Right? So in your view, where would relatives fall in your tzedakah world? Are they first?
If they're
They
needier than
needed
the
it.
others, yeah, if they need it.
They needed it.
If they don't need it, then they go to the bottom of the list, if at all.
Doesn't it also depend on how you define what's important? And what I mean by that is, let's say you are in a family that believes that education is the single most important thing to spend money on. And you have, relatives, I mean, make this up, let's say, it's a brother and sister-in-law who can afford a nice lifestyle for their children, for your nieces and nephews, but cannot afford to send them to, a top college, for instance, or top private school, whatever. So, you might view that as a significant need. It has nothing to do with sustaining life, but that's a value of yours. So, I think that's a question too. How do you define or what are your priorities? What do you want to support amongst your relatives? Is there a sliding scale there?
Good. Yes, Johnny.
Can you hear me if I'm talking from back here?
Yeah.
Okay. So something it doesn't address is what is surplus? Maybe that's not part of this particular argument, but for some people, let's say in the Fiddler on the Roof days, one chicken on Shabbat was enough. For some other people, they might have needed, 2 chickens and seen that as not having surplus if they had that. In the same way today, I think instead of, nobody defines surplus. You have to sort of define it for yourself. What are your needs and what are you willing to sacrifice in order to support someone else? Maybe that's a totally different topic, but
No,
it occurred to me that there's no definition here of tithing or no indication that, you need to give a certain amount of what you have, but you decide what is surplus in your life.
right. Well, ultimately, we do decide what our needs are. And one person's needs are not necessarily another person's needs. I remember one of my colleagues gave a lecture in Aspen during the summer at the Aspen Institute, which is attended by extremely wealthy people. Aspen at that time, in the summer, that group that meets there are multimillionaires and even billionaires. And the topic was, how much is enough? At what point do you wealthy people stop accumulating more and start using it to do good? How much is enough? Not how much is too much. How much is enough? Do you really need to buy another yacht? A bigger yacht? Do you need a 4th house?
Shoot yourself into space.
Do you need to shoot yourself into space? No, those are, so that's at the top end, right? But we all deal with it that way because those of us on here, I'm making the assumption, are not without food, are not without shelter, are not without adequate clothes, seem to have enough to donate to the temple to be members, and give other charity and are able to donate things. So we're in a category where we have to decide, just like everyone else, what is enough. Now, Jewish tradition came down on some numbers. A long time ago, a tithe is minimum of 10%. The problem with the tithe is it can be defined in different ways because they didn't have a government that had a tax, right? So we are taxed by the government ostensibly to take care of poor people, take care of libraries, roads, infrastructure, to take care of soldiers, to take care of education, right? We pay taxes for our society, right? That's what we do. So is that part of what was tzedakah in ancient days? And what do we do with it now? So if you end up paying 20% of your income in taxes, is that counted at all toward tzedakah? Now, in their world, 10% was a minimum of what you had to give to tzedakah, and a maximum was 30%. But their governments had varying governments. Sometimes there were taxes for Jews. Sometimes the community taxed. Sometimes the synagogue required or the court required certain amounts. So those were numbers that were to say to you, you can't impoverish yourself, but you have to figure out what it means to meet your needs, but to also recognize there are other needs. That's the balance. And it's very hard if we take it seriously, right? Do I really need another book more than I need to give a little more tzedakah? Well, for me, books are really a need. I have to have books for my soul. That's part of who I am. Do I need another suit? Well, for me, I don't worry about suits so much. And I'm willing to live with my old suits and my old shirts much longer than maybe others would. But that's my priority, right? And each
Right.
of us, for some people, the way they dress is part of their soul, part of how they view themselves, part of what nurtures the way they feel about the world. Or food. You know, I'm kind of a peasant when it comes to food. You know, I'm satisfied with basic food as long as there's hot sauce. And some kind of hot sauce has to be there, and ideally some kind of jalapeno peppers or something, or red pepper flakes. If that's there, I'm fine. For other people, they need to have really beautiful food sometimes for their soul, or wine, or some kind of a single malt, liquor that satisfies their soul. So each of us have to come to that. So let's look at the next one, because it is, there we go. This is a guy who's nuts about giving tzedakah. Absolutely bizarro about giving tzedakah, and he's so well known that the people collecting charity run away from him because he impoverishes his family with his need to give tzedakah. Okay? Who would like to do this one? Who do we have left? I don't see everybody.
I got it.
Okay, thanks, Fred.
Eleazar, the man of Birta, whenever the command fundraisers, communal fundraisers would see him, they would run and hide. For whatever he had with him, he would give them. One day he went to the market to buy items for his daughter's dowry. The charity collectors saw him and hid from him, but he ran after them and said to them, I swear you must tell me with what cause you are busy. They answered, with the marriage dowry of an orphan boy marrying an orphan girl. He said to them, I swear by the temple worship that those needy brides take precedence over my daughter. He took everything he had with him and gave it to them. Only one coin remained in his possession, and with it he bought some grains of wheat. And when he came home, he climbed up and threw them into the storage room. His wife came home and asked her daughter, what did your father bring you? The daughter replied, whatever he brought, he threw in the storage room. She went to open the door of the storage room and found that it was full of wheat, that the wheat was pouring out of the door's hinges, and that the volume of the wheat made it impossible to open the door. She, the daughter, went to the study hall and said, come and see what your beloved, your friend, did for you. He replied to her, as far as you are concerned, I swear by the temple worship that it is all dedicated to sacred use, and you have no more priority claim on it than any of the poor of Israel.
Okay. So here's a guy that obviously prioritizes poor needs, the needs of the poor, over his entire family. He considers his family basically to be equal with everyone else, and if others are poor, then his family is poor. But it goes beyond that, right? God intervenes and a miracle takes place. This is, I'm not sure what fairy tale this is. It's sort of like Jack and the Beanstalk a little, who sells his cow for some magic beans, and the beans multiply, make this big stalk. In this case, he has one coin, he buys some wheat. God makes the wheat into an abundance of wheat, which means if he would sell that wheat, he could take care of his daughter's wedding, her dowry. And he says, daughter, you're just like all the other needy daughters of this town. I treat you exactly the same. That wheat is for God's service, and it's not for us. So what do you think of him?
I will not use the term.
You don't think much of him, right, Fran?
I think in a modern family, he might be thrown out of the house.
So what do you think the rabbi's attitude is toward him?
I think he's very grateful.
Yeah.
You mean, you think,
I think the rabbi sees all these needy people and sees that this gentleman is helping them and feeding them or clothing them. He may not know that he's not doing the same for his daughter.
so why do you think they run away from him?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Well, why do you think they run away from him? His reputation is such that whenever the tzedakah collectors are doing their mitzvah, they run away, they hide from him. Yeah.
Maybe it's the concern for his family.
Fred?
It is what?
Pirkei Avot says specifically, and it may have to do with the same exact situation, that one should not pauperize themselves in order to serve the public in that such a way. And so I think it just doesn't make sense.
Right. So why is it in the Talmud?
For that very reason. That's advice to people: do not pauperize yourself and give it all away. You keep a certain level of lifestyle, which is appropriate, and then whatever is surplus, that's fine, give it away.
Well, do you think this actually happened? Was this an incident that actually occurred?
Probably.
I have.
I would think so.
So you think a miracle happened?
I suspect that some other philanthropist did that.
Oh, they snuck it in? There's
That's right.
okay. There's a funny story. It starts with a midrash of a brother who is married with children and another brother who's single. They have fields that abut each other, and the single brother feels sorry for the married brother because he has all these mouths to feed, and single brother has only himself, and he knows his brother is too proud to accept any gift from him. So at night he sneaks grain into the brother's granary. Now, at the same time, the married brother says, I have all these family members to help me. My poor single brother is all by himself, and he's got to work the field all by himself. So he sneaks grain at night into his brother's. And one day they meet each other, sneaking into each other's, and they hug each other. And the Midrash says, on that spot where the brothers found each other, that's where the Holy Temple was built. And that's a beautiful story,
Nice.
but there's a modern Israeli version of it. The modern Israeli version was that the married brother says, my single brother doesn't have anybody to feed, and I got all these mouths to feed. So at night he snuck in and stole grain from his single brother. And the single brother said, I'm all alone. I don't have anyone who's going to look after me. I need extra grain. And he went and stole grain from his married brother. And one night they met, stealing each other's grain. And on that spot, the Knesset was built.
Oh, wow.
It's a joke.
Oh,
Yeah, Joni?
I didn't see this as like the wheat magically increasing. I saw it that this happened all the time and that he kept throwing wheat in there. And that it's accumulated over time from how many times he's done this same thing where he's only had a few pennies left. He buys a little wheat, he throws it in the storage room.
Okay, that's plausible.
But I don't get why that's part of this.
Well, that's the reason I'm looking at is if you look at the word beloved, it's capitalized, and friend is capitalized. It's referring, the daughter believes it's from God. That's why she says, your friend, your beloved. She thinks this God has done this because he's studying all the time and he's given away all of his possessions. I think Fred's right. The Talmud puts it in here. I don't know that it ever happened. I don't think it did. The Talmud often comes up, like the case with the cistern. There probably wasn't an exact situation of two towns like that, but there were enough similarities. What they try to do is create a thought problem. How do we think about scarcity? Or how do we think about someone who's giving too much and is impoverishing the people closest to him? How do we think about it? How do we talk about it? So they would come up with these kind of thought experiments. And I think this is one of those. I don't think they meant us to take it literally. They meant us to say, you have to balance the needs of yourself and your family with the needs that exist. This is an orphan boy and an orphan girl who need to get married. They're not starving, apparently, because they're raising money for their dowry, for their wedding. That's not, if you will, a necessity. In the Jewish world, wedding is important, but it's not as important as food and shelter, right? And so their mission is about raising enough money to get them have a proper marriage, proper wedding ceremony, a chuppah. So you could argue maybe he should give a little, but why should he give all of that? Because this guy has no sense of priority at all. He is not even thinking about priority. From his standpoint, his family is absolutely at the bottom with everybody else, and they have no priority, nor does anyone else except the poorest of the poor. And I think the Talmud's saying to us, that's wrong. You need to make priorities, and they should be based on values. So let's go on, if we can, to the next. Okay, let's see where we are here. I think we have a nice smaller one here. Okay, I'll read this one, unless we have someone who's dying to read. Okay, Shimon, son of Shetach, traded in cotton. His students said to him, Master, allow us to buy you a donkey so you will not have to labor so much, meaning carrying around all this cotton. Cotton could be very heavy in big bundles. They went and bought him a donkey from a certain Syriac, meaning a non-Jew, found upon it a precious stone. So in the saddlebag of the donkey, there was this stone that the merchant, the Syriac, had forgotten about or misplaced. They came to him and said, now you need not labor ever again. Said he, why so? They replied, we have bought you a donkey from a certain Syriac and found upon it a precious stone. He asked, but does the owner know of it? Meaning, did the owner know there was a stone in there? They replied, no. He told them, go and return it. And they said, now this, the Talmud puts this in, but did not Rav Huna Bivi, son of Gozlan, say, quoting Rav is a big chacham, he's a big wise rabbi, Rav. That's why they just call him Rav, right? No other name is necessary. It was stated in the presence of Rabbi Judah the Prince, another big rabbi called Rabbi. That's what rabbi is, Rabbi. Even according to the view that stealing from a heathen is forbidden, is not appropriating his lost property permitted. So he's quoting a statement that says, there is an opinion that says you can steal from non-Jews. But even the view that says stealing from a non-Jew is forbidden, isn't lost property permitted to be kept from a non-Jew? Right? So they're saying basically to the rabbi, listen, you have the right to keep this. It's lost property. You're not stealing. And this is what it says about Rabbi Shimon, son of Shetach. Do you think that Simon, the son of Shetach, is a barbarian? Simon, the son of Shetach, preferred hearing, blessed be the God of the Jews, to all the riches of the world. Meaning he would rather the Syriac say, blessed be the God of the Jews who raised up people like you, who returned my gem, than he would to having all the riches of the world. For him, that is a value that is beyond compare and cannot be bought. So what do you think of that story? Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but I still think they should have returned the stone.
Well, they did return. Well, they didn't. He did. He returned the stone.
Yeah.
Right? Shimon ben Shechtach returned the stone. His
Okay.
student said you shouldn't. You have a right to keep it. Right? Isn't it caveat emptor? Let the buyer beware. Isn't it? I mean, would anyone argue today that if you bought a house and you went up to the attic and you found a Monet up there, that you owe it to the previous owner?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes,
Argue that?
Yeah.
If the person who sold it had sold you all the contents of the house, what was left in it, that's the usual sale. So, right, it's like the found stone.
Right.
Do you owe it? What do you think? Do you owe it? Should you return it?
Mhm.
Legally.
Well, if the critical matter here is whether you're a Jew or not, I find that hard to take. If I'm not mistaken, the order of the day was to go to the temple and go and stand on the steps for a certain amount of time and say, I found this. And if nobody claims it after a certain amount of time, then you keep it.
Right? What else would you do with it, friend?
What else?
Yeah. I mean, if you've announced it, you've done it for a year, right? Now you're saying, remember, they didn't have the World Wide Web. They didn't have newspapers. They had no way to get the word out beyond their city. And standing on the steps of the temple was a public way to make an announcement, right?
Right.
So what else should that person do? No, I mean, the word, Joni said, but only to Jews. Well, no, there were non-Jews. There was a place for non-Jews at the court, but also Jews had relationships with non-Jews. And if they heard that something was found and they heard from a friend that somebody else had lost it, they would tell them. It was done by word of mouth.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if that's the similar case to this, because this is a case where it's allowed, there is an opinion you can steal from non-Jews. Right? That's not the normative opinion, but there is an opinion in the Talmud that says you can steal from non-Jews. This is the Jerusalem Talmud. And remember, they didn't have such great relationships with non-Jews. Their non-Jews were the Romans. Right? And then later, they were the Byzantines and others who were not very nice to them, and they didn't have a real chummy relationship.
I don't think that's exactly the situation that we're talking about here. I mean, these are established enemies. We're talking about in the normal course of business, he bought an animal from somebody in a perfectly up and up deal. So I just don't think that's comparable.
So what, you think they should have returned the gem?
Absolutely.
Well, so did Shimon ben Shetach. The rabbi says, I want to do it for another reason. I want to do it because I want him to see the values that I have as a Jew who believes in God. That as a Jew who believes in God, my values are such that whatever the law is, I will not keep something that belongs to someone else when I know that that person has a right to that stone, even if I have a legal right to it. Right?
Mhm.
Yes.
Right.
I appreciate what you just said, because I read that over. I studied this before we came. I read it over several times. I did not understand that last line, but you just explained it.
Can we see that
Thank
last
you.
one again?
Yeah, let me put it up again.
Blessed be the God of Jews to all the riches of this world.
Right, that Shimon ben Shetach prefers a non-Jew praising God because a Jew who believes in God did something that he might himself not have done. The Syriac might not have returned a gem like that. He is so amazed that this Jew would do it that he praises the God of the Jews. And he would rather hear that than all the riches of the world. You know, it's one of the things, let's take the opposite of that. What happens when you see a Haredi Jew in handcuffs or in a court being accused of a terrible crime? When you see a Jew who dresses like, wears a kippah, has tzitzit, and has a peyot, how do you feel? Or even a person like Bernie Madoff, how did we feel when we knew this public Jew was accused of all these things and in fact convicted of all that, right? That's the opposite. Then who is going to say, blessed be the God of the Jews, with the example of Bernie Madoff? Right? This is the opposite. This is the Jew who goes above and beyond what anyone would expect in his world and does it and elicits from that person a praise of God. And for him, that's worth all the money in the world.
It's beautiful.
Right? So there's a lesson that says our values and our reputation of living our values are really more important than money.
Right.
We should remember that.
Mhm.
You know, maybe when the reality is that the thinking about how we tip someone in a restaurant,
Oh, definitely.
or an Uber driver, you think about, we all know who study on Shabbat morning that Victor is an Uber driver. If you think of every Uber driver as Victor, wouldn't you give more because your friend is doing that to pick up money? So this guy who's there is not doing it just because they love it. They're doing it because they need to do it. And if you have a little extra, right? And maybe someone will see that you're wearing a Star of David, or they'll see my kippah, and they'll say, oh, what a nice, that Jewish person is so good and nice.
Mhm.
I'll say, blessed is the God of the Jews. Okay, let's look at 7, because we're coming to an end. And we're getting through all of these sources, which amazes me. The rabbis established the principle of do not wrong your fellow and applied it to one who is with you in Torah and commandments. All who, meaning the Jews, that's how the rabbis in the Talmud applied it. All who are from the nations that are guided by the ways of religion and serve God in any way, even though their faith is far from ours, are exactly like Jews regarding these matters, whether in lost articles or in business errors or in all other matters without distinction. Now, this is from the Meiri. The Meiri is a medieval Jew, and he had good relationships with his Christian and Muslim neighbors. And he's saying, even though the principle, he's a major commentator. If you go on Sefaria, you'll see the Meiri listed in the commentaries on the Torah. He says, this principle, do not wrong your fellow, should apply to everyone, not just to Jews.
Right. I
Right.
agree. I agree with that. How can you
No.
disagree with that?
Right.
It's- How
How
can you
can you-
disagree with that? It's
There are a lot of
beautiful.
Jews that disagree with it.
Yes,
A
there
lot
are.
of Jewish communities that disagree with it. Right? Some of our more traditional brethren disagree with that. Or atheists.
Well, for instance, if you're an attorney and you're representing another Jew, or let's say you're on the opposing side and the man is Jewish and you're Jewish. If you think the man has wronged the community, you need to stand up and address that. But I think sometimes you could be swayed because he might be Jewish and maybe you'll take a different tack. I don't know. But to me, these are principles. It's like when you're a principled individual, you follow things that are principled. I mean,
Well, but you're still weighing principles. And remember, that's what this session is. You're weighing values, because your value is everyone is created in the image of God. We believe that. And yet, I have limited resources. I have to make decisions. Who do I give to? How much do I give to my highest principles that I value? How much do I give to my principles that are a little further down the ladder? Because we all make, value decisions about what's important and what isn't to us. And obviously we shouldn't be like that foolish man that just impoverishes his family.
right.
But nor should we be necessarily by someone who doesn't give tzedakah and doesn't help anyone except his immediate family and doesn't think about the greater world. We need to be in between, and I think all of us are, meaning all of us on this class. I can't say all of the world, but I can say that the people I know tend to be people who have a generosity of spirit, but also have good values. And they try to balance as best they can. And that's where we find the conflict in ethics. And I'll give you one final thing. There is a law in the Talmud that if two people are in the desert, it's a famous case, one of them has water. The other one, his canteen is dry. It's going to take them 3 days to get to a well. And the one who has the water has only enough for him to survive. Gail, you remember this? I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah. The law is you cannot share your water. You must save yourself. Better that you survive than that both of you die and that you share the water. Because how do you know whose blood is redder, it says? Meaning, how do you know who's more important in God's scheme of the world? You don't know. You might just be the person that will do something very important in the future. And if you allow yourself to share and you both die, you have deprived all those people of the fact that you invented, penicillin. That you made a discovery that changed people's lives. Now, that is a thought process. That is a thought problem. That never happened exactly that way. But it's all about weighing values and deciding how do we apply them in the real world, right? So our tradition gives us the theoretical framework, the ideal framework, the aspirational framework, and then we are tasked with applying it in our lives. and making decisions. And remember what I said last week, Rabbi Meir said, what mitzvah is the most important? It's the one that's in front of you. But it doesn't mean you have to give everything to that one, right? Like the guy did with his daughter's dowry. Doesn't everything goes to it. It may mean you buy him a cup of coffee or a sandwich, or you give him $1. Doesn't mean you empty your wallet, right?
Right.
This is our kind of introduction to some of the ethical thinking. And we're going to look in May at faith thinking, how we look at faith. And some of you have been taking a class with Rabbi Pomerantz about faith and spirituality. So I expect you to come with all kinds of wonderful insights. Have a wonderful, good Shabbos. And
Thank you.
You too.
Rabbi, our bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah, the juniors, the 10th graders, are they having discussions like this?
at Temple Beth Shalom, they are.
They are,
I
right?
don't know if they are in other synagogues. I think they are. Most of the rabbis I know talk about this with bar and bat mitzvahs and with confirmands.
Mhm.
Do it, and I know Barb does it in our religious school, that the teachers there are doing it there. And I believe it's being done in a lot of places. The problem is most Jews don't belong to synagogue, and most kids, don't necessarily stay for the whole amount of years, right? So you get them, and a lot of kids only come episodically, not all the time. Youth group, they do these discussions. Jewish camps do these discussions,
Right.
right? But you got to be there,
You have to be there, have to be able to afford to go to those places.
right? Or to go to synagogue or any of this, right? Jewish day schools do this.
This is really, really needs to start very early.
Well, and again, in our preschool, it does take place. In our, in the school that Margie runs, our day school, they do talk about all this.
Good.
And there are non-Jews that are there.
Right, I know.
There's Jews in our preschool and in our school.
Mhm.
Anyway, it was wonderful, and I'll ask Liam to stop the